Okay, Ecclesiastes chapter 1. I'll start with verses 1 through 11, as that really acts as a great prologue to the rest of the book, and will do a great job of setting the tone for what's to come. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, this is the word of the Lord. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, "See, this is new"? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. So this prologue sets itself up into a few distinctive phases of thought, or sort of sub-themes. We'll see each of these expanded upon in the coming chapters. These themes are, number one, the vanity of work. Number two, the vanity of repetition. Number three, the vanity of novelty. And number four, the vanity of legacy. So I'll break these down by verses. Verse number 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Well, this sets the tone for who the author is. And as I mentioned in the previous video, while there are two schools of thought on this, I fall on the side of this being Solomon, partly because of this introduction. The preacher, Kohelet, had the job of speaking wisdom to the community of God's people. So first and foremost, because of this, we're to see what follows as something that is meant for believers, not for unbelievers. The wisdom given in this book is meant for our sanctification as we plumb the depths of God's sovereignty versus our responsibility, and to seek to find the relationship between those two concepts. The preacher, as mentioned here, is the son of David and a king in Jerusalem. So taking that literally, it would mean Solomon. Now, those on the other side of this issue would take that figuratively and claim that the author could be anyone who is in the Davidic line of kings. Verse number 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So a persistent theme of Hebrew writing is the use of repetition to make a point. 5 out of these 12 words is a variation of the word vanity. The author's intent is to drive home this superlative nature of the frustrating, the fleeting, the unsatisfying, and all of the confusing aspects of life, and to set the tone for just how big these things truly are. He says all is vanity. And last time I checked, all means all. Right? So perhaps maybe there's some hyperbole at work here, but one of the first rules of great writing is to make an impact with your opening statement, right? And this certainly delivers that. You think to some of the other wisdom literature. You have Psalm chapter 1 opens with, "Blessed is the man who walks in God's ways." You have Proverbs chapter 1 opens with, "Hey, here's wisdom and instruction so you can walk in God's ways." And here's Ecclesiastes 1 with, "Hey, here's a bucket of futility." Yeah, it's funny, but as we'll learn, studying these areas of dark providence, they can and they will help us walk in God's ways. So while Ecclesiastes may seem like a bit of a Debbie Downer, it's ultimately meant for our sanctification. And I believe we're the most sanctified by the darker and the heavier trials of life, and maybe not so much when things are all well and good and honky-dory. So I think that's another important mindset to lock in on as we proceed. Verse number 3, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? This is the vanity of work. While this sort of strikes the tone of a rhetorical question, it's an important one to ask, and it really should be answered. What do we get for a lifetime of work? What do we get for a lifetime of saving and spending and serving and building and repairing and doing and da 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 da? Ultimately, we die and return to the earth and take none of it with us. Maybe we can pass some of it on to our heirs or those that come up after us, but that can be squandered and misused, and it often is. And we see this a lot. We see this pattern in the Old Testament, don't we? Such and such king did not follow in the steps of his father and did not obey the Lord's statutes and commands. And you have the destruction of the kingdom as a consequence of that. Even in our own time, a very small percentage of generational wealth actually accomplishes what it's intended for. And for the unbeliever, this is a miserable question to ponder. And it can easily lead to despair. But for the believer, this should give us pause and cause us to take some stock of our lives and where are we putting our priorities? Out of all of our activities under the sun, all this work that we do, what's going to endure? What's not? What's going into eternity? And what's going to be burned up? As potentially depressing as those thoughts might be, the morbid among us may claim, well, what's the point of working if it's all in vain, right? Well, it doesn't mean we get to skip out on working. That's not going to change. We're built to work. We're made to work. Our bodies function so we can work. We're commanded to work. We're to be diligent with our time and our abilities. We're supposed to do things. We're supposed to work. That's not going to change. So what needs to change is our mindset if we're tempted to think along those lines. Verses 4 through 7. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. Okay, so here we have a vanity of repetition, literally on a global scale. He's talking about nature. Water evaporates. It makes clouds and returns as rain. Water does its course over and over and over again. Winter arrives, and then spring, and then summer, and then fall. And hey, look out, here comes winter again, right? Tides come in, tides roll out. And would you look at that? Hey, it's another full moon. And here we are on the smaller scale, under the sun, running our little errands. The same type of repetition. Hey, I made dinner last night, but you know what? I'm going to want to eat again today, so I'm going to have to make dinner again tonight. Right? You put gas in the car, and hey, won't you know, it's empty again. I just cut the grass a week ago, and here it needs to be cut again. Hey, all right, finally got some money saved up, but then something breaks. The washing machine breaks. Your car throws a tie rod and has to be repaired. And then it's back to trying to build up your savings again. Repetition. Does anybody else have a what I call a chaos corner in your kitchen? This is where things just sort of randomly pile up. Keys and papers and just things. Things just tend to pile up in this corner. It's a disaster area. You get aggravated, you get mad, you clean it all up. Here you are 3 weeks later doing the same thing again because the chaos corner got a whole bunch of stuff left in it again. On and on and on and on we go. This vanity of repetition. Much like our work, we can be tempted to respond with, well, what's the point? What's the point of cleaning this mess up if I'm only going to have to do it again? What's the point of fixing this silly lemon of a car if it's only going to break down again? But we don't get that option. The activities aren't going to stop. We still need to eat. We still need to be able to get to work. We still need to keep our house in working, operable order so we can have a safe and comfortable place to live. Having clean clothes is much better than the alternative, right? The laundry's not going to go away. So if these things aren't going to go away, if they're not going to change, it's our mindset that needs to change, since these things won't. Look at verses 8 through 10. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been done in the ages before us. And here is what we call the vanity of novelty. You know, if you read through the book of Daniel, you see some empires come and go. You have the Babylonian Empire replaced by the Persian Empire, who was replaced by the Greek Empire, who was replaced by the Roman Empire. Throughout all of this history, the Ming Dynasty, the Mongolian Empire, the Byzantine Empire, Ottomans, the British Empire, Spanish Empire, and the American Empire. And while the names and the borders and the weaponry may change, very, very little else does. These new empires are still being led by the same weaselly little sinners. And in the realms of entertainment and vice, there's nothing new. This is the vanity of novelty, right? The people got drunk 1,000 years ago. Hey, they still get drunk today. People ate, rich, decadent food back then. Well, they still do today. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, these are no different today than they always have been. People sometimes say, well, can you believe how graphic and how violent that movie was? Well, yeah, I can. Do you have any idea what the Romans did to Christians in the arenas for public entertainment? Let's say, did you see what that woman accused that politician of doing? Yeah, I can believe that. Can you believe what our government does to its own citizens? Yeah, I can believe that too. We see it today. Generations ago, it was the Red Scare. It was McCarthyism. It was Watergate. Go further back, it was the slaughter of Native Americans. It was the Salem witch trials. You even have Socrates put on trial for corrupting the youth of Athens. There's never been a shortage of cruelty and barbarism here under the sun. All of our gadgets and gizmos, the food, the drink, the sports, the leisure activities, the tantalizing and the tempting, and all manner of ridiculously easy access to it. And what happens? People will still chase after more. It's never a completed level of satisfaction. There's nothing new here. And all these things fail to satisfy the appetites that we have. That lack of satisfaction inevitably and consistently will lead to frustration. We can easily be found always wanting more but never having enough. So what do? Since none of these exterior influences, any of these political or entertainment or Hollywood, none of these influences will ever change. So what do we need to do? We need to develop a new mindset. We need to have a different perspective. Verse number 11, there is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. We call this the vanity of legacy. Okay, so in the Old Testament, and even really throughout all of history, having your name as a nation, or more specifically your name as an individual in a bloodline, having that name wiped out and forgotten about was considered a curse. It was a very huge deal. Well, today it just sort of happens. I know my parents reasonably well. I've met all but one of my grandparents. I met only one of my great-grandparents, and I met none of my great-great-grandparents. I have some snippets of stories about them and that were told to me by other people in my family, my mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, but unless I went and looked it up, honestly, I couldn't tell you their names or really much of anything about their lives off the top of my head. Sure, we can use Ancestry.com and various, archives to research our family names and get a sense of where we come from. What bearing does that have on our lives other than kind of a neat little story? I once received some information on the lineage of my father's side, the Robinson side, all the way back, 8 full generations. And it was discovered that a Joseph Robinson arrived in Virginia from England, went west, and settled in what's now known as Fayette County, Kentucky. His son was one of the charter members of David's Fork Baptist Church in Lexington. Now, I grew up in New England. I knew none of this until I moved to Kentucky in my 30s, but 8 generations pass, and here is a bloodline Robinson male right back where they started. Now, aside from this being an example of a generational vanity of repetition, it's kind of a neat story to tell over coffee, but it doesn't help pay the bills. We think about how interesting it is when archaeologists, discover the ruins of some ancient civilization. And what do we say? Well, oh, that's neat. Oh, that's neat. How about that? And then our attention invariably drifts somewhere else, and it's just not that important to us, nor do we really learn anything substantial from it. The saying goes, the only thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history, right? So what happens? We forget. Typically, the lives of our ancestors don't have a profound impact on us, perhaps outside of the immediate. Some things I learned from my parents and grandparents, plus the things that I learned on my own, those things will be passed on to my kids. Maybe they'll pass it on to their kids, but likely it's going to end just after 2 or 3 generations. So, what do people want to do? They want to make a name for themselves. They want to carve out a legacy, but unless you're one of the very, few, globally speaking, that gets recorded in the archives of history, you and I, we're not making any big splashes. You can donate $1 million to the local hospital, and they'll build a brand new, big wing in your name, and that's great, and there's a beautiful plaque and a ribbon cutting ceremony. But 50, 75 years later, it'll be old, and it'll be completely rehabbed or torn down, and your plaque that you got, that'll be taken down with it. So what else? Well, hey, maybe the internet can help, right? The advancement of instant video technology. What has that done? It's convinced so many people that they can be famous. This overnight viral sensation, and it's usually for doing something completely foolish. Or what else? Worse yet, the worst of all, you can be an Instagram influencer. I'm going to have 3 million viewers and be able to influence people's opinions and where they shop and what they eat and what they do and da-da-da-da-da-da. It's all vanity. And as the lightning speed of data and information progresses, that scope gets smaller and smaller and smaller, right? I think back to my childhood in the pre-digital age, you had a much smaller circle of celebrities and all of these so-called beautiful people, right? But today, it's so prevalent. The sheer volume of these notable folks, it makes it impossible to even keep up with it, even if you wanted to. You see all these, you get these sensational clickbait pop-ups. I still get these things sometimes from MSN, just on the news website. Did you hear what Gussie G said to Schmoopy Poo? Baby Flex tweets about it. I'm like, well, who? I don't even know who that is. I don't know who the majority of these people are. And honestly, I don't even really care. Because given a long enough timeline, generations to come won't even remember. So, what are we left with? This uncomfortable reality is that we, non-celebrities, non-historical icons, are, give or take, roughly less than 100 years or so away from being completely forgotten about. That's heavy. But and that'll keep happening, on and on and on. The hourglass of time ticks away as our vainly worrisome little current events and all these things we get so worked up about, it becomes ancient history. St. John Chrysostom is quoted as saying, if you knew how quickly people would forget about you after your death, you would not seek in your life to please anyone but God. Well, how's that for perspective? So what does this mean? Does this mean we don't try to pass on anything to our kids? We don't try to teach them anything? We don't try to raise them to believe in God as we believe? Of course not. We're still to do those things we're commanded to. Knowing that this vanity of searching for a legacy isn't going to change, what do we need to do? We need to change our perspective instead. You want to be an influencer? It starts and usually ends right at home. You want to have a legacy? You repent and believe the gospel. You raise your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. You study the word. You go to church. You fellowship with believers. You be faithful over the little things. And you try not to fret about the vanities of life. Because these things that we chase after or we get upset about, these cycles of trivialities, whatever they are, here's what you do. Make yourself a list of all of these things that you worry about, that you fret about, that occupy so much of your time. Make a list and then ask yourself, what on this list is going to matter in 10 days? Watch that list get smaller. Take it a step further. What on this list is going to matter in 10 months? Well, that list gets smaller again. What on this list is going to matter in 10 years? Well, it's probably microscopic by then. You can use this as sort of a benchmark to weigh the frustrating, the perplexing, the fleeting, the vain things of life in that cosmic scale that I referenced in the previous video. You kind of categorize them into what will endure versus what will be burned up. Categorize what is being done for the sake of eternity versus what is ultimately just going to be wood, stubble, and dry grass for the fire. If we continually ask ourselves these questions, our perspective will inevitably start to shift, and things that are of the cause and concern of Christ begin to come into clearer focus. And the petty little things of this world just will naturally sort of drift into the background. So we kind of recap this first section. The wise man knows that his work is in vain. He knows that this repetitive, these mundane tasks of life are being done in vain. He knows that his fleeting interest in the new things that life has to offer is all in vain. He knows that his quest for a legacy is in vain. But he can still do these things joyfully. That's the key I want you to keep in mind. You can still do these things joyfully, because he knows that all of them are a gift from God. And hey, guess what? God's gifts are meant to be enjoyed by his people. Keep that theme in mind. Ecclesiastes is not a book about frustration. Ecclesiastes ultimately is a book about joy. So keep that theme of joy in your mind as we go through this. All right. Let's pick up in verse 12, and we'll head on through the end of the chapter. Verse 12 through 18. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after the wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. So I genuinely believe that this section corresponds with 1 Kings chapter 11, which shows the point where Solomon turns from the Lord. If you want to make a note of this, give 1 Kings chapters 3 through 11 a read over, and you'll see his rise and his fall. He is the wisest of the wise. He is being graced with wealth and knowledge and possessions and a kingdom. He builds the temple. He builds the palace, these huge ornate structures. Things seem to be going so well for him until you hit chapter 11 and you see his fall. So, as I believe that he's likely writing Ecclesiastes later on in life and just sort of reflecting back on all of his errors, this seems to be the point where the historical accounts can line up with this. So we'll take first verses 12 through 14 as well as 16 and 17. We'll get back to 15 in a minute. So looking at those verses, who better than a king to be able to search out all the vanities that life has to offer? He's got the money, he's got the resources, he's got the time, and whatever he says goes, right? Surely someone in his position could sample everything and find some satisfaction and contentment in it all, right? As we can see, it's not going to be the case, but he sets his heart to it and he tries anyway. But real quick before we get into this, I want you to think about Proverbs 15:22 for a second. Proverbs 15:22 says, without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors they succeed. Okay, let's go to Ecclesiastes 1:13. And I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Sneak ahead to Ecclesiastes 1:17, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. Okay, there's a point here. So, who did Solomon seek counsel from, and who were the wise advisors that he consulted before heading off onto this adventure of his, trying to plumb the depths of pleasure? Right? The wisdom from Proverbs 15:22 was likely written by him, most likely after the fact, but here he is consulting with exactly just himself alone. And would you have it known that he unanimously agreed that this would be a super cool idea? Of course, that's a recipe for foolishness. I consulted myself and I agreed this is fantastic. Now, that's how that goes, right? So Solomon here has all the resources available to him to, as I said, plumb the depths of human vanity, of everything that's being done under the sun. Did it go well for him? No, it did not. Just the opposite. He called it an unhappy business, as the ESV translates it, which I think is kind of a delicate way of putting it. The King James Version uses the phrase and calls it a sore travail. I kind of like the way that sounds better. A sore travail. This was a burdensome, a wearisome task, and that carries a connotation of injury to the individual. A sore travail that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. Just as kind of a side note here, I want to point out the Hebrew word used for God here is Elohim. And it's consistently applied this way throughout the book. The use of Elohim, by its meaning, shows God's power, his sovereignty, his might, his transcendence, the fact that he is infinitely above us. The more personal, covenantal use of Yahweh isn't used at all in Ecclesiastes. And I think that's intentional, because the overriding theme of the latter half of the book is going to showcase God's utter authority over our lives and everything therein. So anyway, back to the text. So let's jump down to verses 16 and 17. And it looks like Solomon makes another attempt at it, but he adds madness and folly to this list of things he wants to know. It almost reads like the first go-around resulted in the shocking conclusion that it was all vanity, but he didn't stop there. It's like, hey, I'm going to try even more sin now. Maybe I didn't dive in deep enough. Surely at the real bottom of the muck pile, there's going to be some real understanding there. No. He saw that everything done under the sun, now including madness and folly. And he still came to the same realization. Yep, it's still vanity. Yep, still a striving after the wind. So let's jump back to verse 15 for some applied learning. So we kind of took that section of verses, that verse out, and we're going to put it back in, and we're going to see what we can learn from this. Okay, one of his conclusions was, quote, "What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted." So here's the question. Why can crooked things not be made straight? Okay. The short answer is because God, in his sovereignty, has made it crooked. If Solomon, the king, with his eyes completely wide open and heaps of wisdom, with seemingly unlimited earthly power, money, resources, and time, if he can't straighten out a crooked situation, how much less should we expect to? Okay? None of us can straighten what God has made crooked. This is helpful. This helps to abolish the thoughts that there is some form of meaningless or randomness to the frustrations and the confusions of these vanities that we experience under the sun. If God has made the situation crooked, there is a purpose behind it. It's not random. There's a meaning to it. Now, we may not ever know the meaning why, but we can trust that there is one. And instead of getting mad about it, we ought to instead ask ourselves, how is God sanctifying me in this situation? How can I glorify him best in the middle of this awful crooked situation? What is he trying to teach my stubborn, impatient, weaselly little self here? And again, it's a need for us to shift our perspective. The second part of that verse, what is lacking cannot be counted. Okay, our sinful nature will never, ever have enough. We can't tally up the things that we don't have because there's always going to be something else that we're going to want on the horizon, okay? Chasing after deeper and deeper earthly pleasures will only have us on one foolish errand after another, still coming up unsatisfied, still wanting more and more at the end of the day. What are we commanded to do? We're commanded to count our blessings, not what we don't have, right? We're to count what we do have. We're to learn to be content in all situations. This is another shift in perspective that is necessary for us. We can't change the scenario. What we can change is our perspective on the scenario. So I'll close out with chapter 1, verse 18. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Right? Ignorance is bliss, right? The less that you know, sometimes the better off. The more that you dive into a particular topic, the more that you read and you understand about it, a lot of times the worse it gets, can't it? Wisdom then almost becomes a double-edged sword. You know, how many times have you caught yourself after a situation saying, yeah, it's probably best if I don't know. It's probably best if I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You know, you're raised to believe particular positive things, maybe about your government, maybe about your country, maybe even about your own family tree. And as you get older, you start to look into these things a little bit more than what you're initially taught. Maybe you experience more. You realize it's probably not quite as rosy as you were meant to believe. You know, the more you know, the worse it can get. You talk about history, you talk about politics, you talk about warfare, you know, you name it, politics especially. You know, what I was taught about governments and world history in grades, you know, K through 12. I come to find out later on in life as I kind of dug into these things a little bit more and wanted to read more about the realities of history. It was very different than what I was taught in school. You know, you think, oh, the government would never do things like that. Oh, well, have you heard about the Tuskegee experiment? Have you heard about the MK Ultra experiments? I know you know about the Epstein client list. So you start to read about these people and these places and these events and these awful things, these reprehensible things that happen. And it can kind of crush the spirit when you start to learn that things were not the way that you thought they were. All right, but forget about the things going on in trash world here. What about when we dive into Scripture? The deeper that we dive into Scripture, the deeper we dive into studying the words of God, the more it can wound us, can't it? You know, I joke sometimes about, you know, purposely putting off or not wanting to read or study on a particular biblical topic because what happens, all right? So I read about it, I learn about it. Well, guess what? Now I'm accountable to it. And now I have to put those lessons into practice. And putting lessons into practice means making changes. And changes can certainly be very vexing and troublesome and wounding. You know, I'm sure you maybe experienced this in your own salvation. You know, you're saved and you're saved under a message that, you know, maybe a wrong message that, you know, just accept Jesus into your heart and everything will be good and everything will be good in your life. That's a wrong message, but God still saves people in spite of that message. But what will usually happen immediately after that, right? It gets painful, right? Trials start coming in and you're not living your best life now. But what happened? Growth ended up happening. You know, I remember in particular struggling really with the doctrine of election, right? And some of these doctrines of grace that I adhere to, and these doctrines of grace that I adhere to now. A friend of mine started telling me about the doctrine of election. I never heard it before. He's telling me about election. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? That God only saves certain people? He only saves the ones that he's preordained for salvation? You mean that some people are born sort of automatically destined for wrath? That's not fair. Yeah, I struggled with the even just the doctrine of God's sovereignty. Even over, you know, what we consider the bad things in life. The bad things happen. You know, what do you mean? What do you mean that God ordains earthquakes that wipe out hundreds of people? That's not fair. Well, and we can say that, but the more you dig into Scripture, and the more I dug into Scripture to try to prove it wrong, the more the Spirit showed me that I was the one who was wrong. And that increased knowledge was vexing to me for quite some time. Think about this another way. Increased knowledge equals increased vexation. All right, here I am. I'm 49 years old. I'm a grown male who was once a strong willed teenage boy, and I've raised two strong willed teenage boys. I know what they're thinking. I know what they're experiencing because I've experienced it as well. But here I am on the other side of it, able to say, yes, I've done that. Yes, I've been there. Yes, I've fallen into those traps. Yes, I've been completely zooted out of my mind in a McDonald's parking lot at 3 a.m., not knowing or caring how I'd get home. I have seen and done and experienced so many ridiculously awful, terrible, repugnant things. But son, I learned from it. God has saved me from that wreckage and increased my knowledge over these things. Son, I'm imparting this wisdom to you. Son, don't do this. Here's a warning. Here's a caution. Here's what I learned. This will likely not end well for you if you persist. Well, if you're a parent, you know this. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And what's the typical response? Nah, I'm going to do it anyway. All right, well, vexation. Vexation and an increase in sorrow. Anyway, that's the first chapter of Ecclesiastes. I hope you enjoyed it. And I welcome you back certainly for the next one. We'll look at chapter 2 next. Until then, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Goodbye.